Good evening, everyone. We're so happy to have you here with us tonight. Thank you for joining our program. I'm Jamie Seward, Associate Director of Affinity Engagement Programs with the Office of Alumni Relations. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Cary Business School Women's Alumni Network and the Penn Club Women in Business. Here to say a few words on behalf of the Penn Club Women in Business is Dorothy Nicholson. Dorothy, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jamie, and welcome Penn and Johns Hopkins women and guests. Thank you for zooming in. I'm Dorothy Nicholson, Chair of the Penn Club Women in Business Society. The goal of our society is to assist women in meeting their professional goals through exploring business issues, problem-solving techniques, and making introductions. Our Women in Business Society, I'm proud to say, is one of the oldest societies at the Penn Club. I'm also very proud to say this is our 4th joint meeting we've had with the Johns Hopkins women. I want to thank Jamie Seward and our committee members, Ora Weisberg, Toby Basad, and Jenny Godman. And a special thanks to Professor Stacey B, who is here to help us increase our ability to be successful negotiators in a variety of contexts. Now back to Jamie, who will introduce Professor Lee and get the program started. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. We've really enjoyed working with you, and we hope to do more collaborative programming in the future. So I am very excited to be here with our special guest, Stacey B. Lee, professor, attorney, healthcare negotiation consultant, and an associate professor of law at the Johns Hopkins Cary Business School. She holds joint appointment at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And tonight she's going to discuss negotiation and its importance. And I've had the pleasure of attending another one of her programs, and you're in for a treat. We're very excited. Now, before I turn the program over to Professor Lee, I encourage you to ask your questions, and we're going to try and get to all of them by typing them in the Zoom Q&A. Now, the Q&A is located at the bottom of your screen. So we'll have time to answer your questions after the program. But for now, I have the pleasure of turning the program over to Professor Lee. Take it away, Professor Lee.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for sharing part of your Tuesday night with me. What we're going to talk about today is negotiating for what's next. And in today's society, in the context of what is happening right now, the importance of effective negotiating skills is now more critical than ever before. What I'd like to focus on tonight is looking at your career and negotiating for that job offer, but then what comes afterwards. What's interesting, if you go to Google and you put in negotiating, the search engine generally prompts you for negotiating salary, negotiating compensation, and that is incredibly important. And we'll hit on that tonight. But the thing that doesn't come up in all the search engines is, how do you negotiate for career success? The strategies and approaches that we talk about today, yes, very important in landing that initial compensation. But at the end of that employment negotiation, the only 2 things that you've secured within your organization is your title and your salary. What real negotiation involves and the way to negotiate for what's next is, how do you use negotiation strategies and approaches to negotiate your role within an organization? And we'll spend some time on that. Now, here's the deal. We have an hour, maybe a little more. I have a ton of things that I can share with you. But what's most important to me is that I hit on the topics surrounding compensation and negotiating your presence within an organization, your voice at the table, and negotiating your career steps in a way that's meaningful to you. Now, Jamie mentioned the chat feature in Zoom. Use it. Now, my multitasking skills, not so great. But Jamie's promised that she will cue me for the good questions that I need to incorporate in our conversation tonight. And I'd like for it to be that. Help me respond to your questions and your needs by letting me know what are some of the career negotiating tips you'd like to hear. Now, with that in mind, let's get started. Negotiating your career. And when I say career, again, that's way more important than your salary. And what I'd like to do is move kind of from left to right here. One of the big things in negotiating, whether it's the distributive approach, the integrative approach, whether you're negotiating a big contract or your salary, are the interests of the parties. What is important to you? So in looking at this column on the far left-hand side, we have people in various stages of their career listening in on this call tonight. We have people who are in college. We have recent alums. We have people who've been in the workforce for a while. When you think about negotiating your compensation, what is important to you right now? Is it the number of hours that you will work? Is it where you will work? Is vacation important to you? Growth opportunities, salary. Oftentimes I get the question, hey, what's the most important dollar figure I should aim for? Well, here's the deal. Salary is important because it lets you do things. And I found that sometimes the compensation in terms of raw salary is a rather short conversation with your prospective employer. What is most important to you? Not just for the job that you're applying for, but in your career trajectory. So take a minute and pause. Given where you are in your life right now, if you're in the market, if you're thinking about going into the market, or whatever your next job will be, what are the things that are most important to you right now? And that should be the lens through which you have your negotiations. Now, if you've been around me, my talks generally focus in on one or two stories about me. When I graduated from law school, what was most important to me was not a steady salary, but a high salary. And that was what shaped my negotiation approach. When I had the opportunity to join Hopkins, the opportunity to work with thought leaders, the opportunity to have a voice at the table and to really advance my interests, both in research and in practice on negotiation and my healthcare topics, made me adopt a different approach. My big point here is there's no magic formula for the appropriate amount. Your compensation package for whenever you go on the market should accurately reflect what your interests are now. Now, Jamie, I'm trusting you because I'm seeing the chat light up. I'm trusting that you will, if there's something big, let me know.
You know it. I got you.
Excellent. All right. So you guys need to have a really good idea of what's important to you. From that, let's get into some practical nuts and bolts. There are two major components for compensation negotiations. There's, let's get real, the bucks. How much is going to be in your paycheck? Now, when you negotiate your compensation, there are several components to that. There's your salary. There's a signing bonus, potentially, stock options, retirement options, tuition reimbursement, housing assistance, insurance, care plans. All of these things factor into the compensation that you are provided from your employer. You should have a full picture of what these things are before you sign on the dotted line. These things are negotiable, and I encourage you to have that factor into the conversation. Now, after you've exhausted that column in terms of the money aspect, and I've often gotten the question, how many times should I go back and forth with an employer? I would assume that the initial offer, there's always room to negotiate with that. So I highly recommend having a counteroffer of what you're looking for. If they come back with another number, Again, other things should factor in. And here's my golden rule for a negotiation. In all of the strategies and approaches that we'll talk about tonight, 3 questions should guide your approach to negotiations. How important is the outcome? What are my long-term goals? And how important is the relationship? When I graduated from law school, the most important thing to me was the outcome, how much was going to be in my paycheck. When I came to Hopkins, the question that guided me, what are my long-term goals and how important is the relationship? The opportunity to get to write with industry thought leaders, the opportunity to have a voice at the table decreased my reliance or the importance for me on the outcome of salary. However, even within salary or compensation, there are many things that are negotiable. And do your homework. In terms of bonus, is it discretionary? Is it based on the performance of the department or you as an individual? These are questions that you should ask throughout the interview process. After you've exhausted that column, we get into what I consider to be the really interesting column, non-compensatory information. What do you want to negotiate? And what's interesting here is I feel there's a lot more flexibility. These items are not so much dictated by the economy, by what's going on in terms of the company's balance sheets. What type of work will you be doing? What's the location? What's the promotion schedule? What are the job characteristics? These things are negotiable because they generally will require a commitment of time or access. That is something that there's a lot more flexibility in than money. What? It's been 5 minutes without a story about me? Sure. When I joined Hopkins, I was leaving private practice. And what was very interesting to me and a bit of an education, what I learned in joining a business school full of PhDs is that within academia, PhDs and JDs aren't necessarily thought of as equivalent degrees. We can have an academic conversation about the merits of this approach at a later time. However, because I was really clear on what my interests were, on the voice that I wanted to have at Hopkins, and I was going to be the only law faculty, it was incredibly important to me that I showed up in a way that would allow me access to decision-making conversations. So after we exhausted the conversation on my salary, which is a little shorter than I had wanted, we moved over to my position and the type of work that we would be doing, that I would be doing. And I asked the dean a question. I asked if he would personally walk me around and introduce me to all of the faculty. And to make it easier for him, I gave him a cheat sheet of what I wanted him to say. Through that, which was my request, was not more money, but a commitment of his time to take an hour or an hour and a half out of his day. By walking me around and introducing me to everyone, the faculty in the department, I showed up with the narrative that I felt was necessary to begin having the voice that I wanted within the organization. Why is that important? Because if you aren't crystal clear on what your interests are, on what you want to get out of that position, you may let opportunities go unrealized. So at the end of the day, spend some time coming up with your ideal salary, but also think about the softer aspects of the negotiation that will help you further whatever your interests are. All right. Now, let's talk confidence for a second. What I found is The best way to increase your confidence when you're having these pretty tough conversations about, hey, how much you should pay me, what you should do, is what is your plan B? And the abbreviation up there, BATNA, is best alternative to the negotiated agreement. If this job offer falls through, what's your plan B? And let's just break this down. If you have a really good plan B, you have a lot more confidence at the table. Now, by virtue of this being a pen carry event, I'm figuring in the college process, you guys had lots of options. Once you know that you're going to school somewhere, that you've gotten into a top tier institution, but you're waiting on that letter from Penn or Hopkins, your plan B is pretty strong. The strength of that plan B may give you the confidence to ask for a little more at the table. So the quick takeaway is until you start your first day of work, you continue to refine your plan B as much as possible. But you also need to be realistic about your plan B. Can you? Do you have another offer on the table? If so, that's really great. Can you just keep searching? Do you have enough money in the bank to float you for 3 months, 6 months? Do you stay at the job that you're currently at? So what is your plan B going into it? And then, can you be replaced at your salary? Do you have another job offer? Test your plan B. And one of the golden rules of negotiation, and what we see in a lot of negotiations, people do a lot of time, spend a lot of time thinking about themselves, what their position is, what they want out of a negotiation. And dare I say, there are several unknowns in a negotiation. But the one thing that you know the most about is yourself. So your goal in a negotiation is to try to step into the shoes of the other side. What is their plan B? Can they hire someone else? Could they leave the position vacant? Could they eliminate it altogether? Could they replace it internally? The viability of those options really affects their willingness to enter into certain conversations with you. And does the company really need you? Or would anyone do? Would operations suffer without you? So if you are looking for a new job with a new employer, the options at the top of the screen make sense. Can they hire someone else? Can they replace internally? Leave it open. If you're asking for money at your current employer or asking for a promotion, are you fungible? Or because you've known what your interests are, because you've pursued your career in the right way, does the company need someone with your unique skills and talents? If so, that might make me a lot more interested in having a conversation to meet your needs. And if you were to leave the organization, would operations suffer? So part of the assessment, in addition, think of it as homework, if you will. Can you tell I miss my students? You need to be well versed in what your interests are. Why are you looking for this job? At this point in your life, what's the most important thing? Cognizant of the fact that as you progress through your career, your interests will change. And when you're going for that new job, whether it be outside or inside within your organization, what is your plan B? And know that the more robust your plan B is, the easier it is to show up to that interview with a lot of confidence. Outside of just thinking about you, what's their plan B? Can they hire someone else? Are you fungible? Those things should also factor in, and timing is important. If there are certain times of the year when you are more integral to the organization, that might be the time to ask for the raise, the promotion. If I were to go to my dean over the summer, it would be pretty easy to get another law professor, because let's face it, who likes practicing law? to teach at Cary. They have the entire summer to do a search. Their BATNA or their plan B looks dramatically different if I were to, though I never would, ask for a raise or promotion 3 weeks before graduation and threaten to quit, leaving the 80 term papers ungraded. So be strategic about when you ask and take the time to consider what are their other options as well as your own. Okay. I feel it would be remiss of me to talk about negotiation strategies and approaches without giving a word to gender differences. And if we had more time, I'd get more into it. However, you get a slide or two. And here's the deal. Sometimes when you read books about negotiation or you have negotiation classes taught in business schools, some of the approaches and strategies are viewed differently depending on whose mouth they are coming out of. We have certain societal expectations, and now is not the time, nor do I have the ability to control how society views people of different ages, races, and genders. What I can control, however, is hoping to raise your level of awareness of some of the general patterns that are associated with how men and women communicate. Now, after I go through this slide, something to keep in mind. Our linguistic style, the way we communicate with the world, and again, generalizations that I've drawn from the research, they are shaped the second you're wrapped in a pink or a blue blanket as you leave the hospital. And what is particularly interesting, and again, I have boy-girl twins, and what was fascinating to me is the way society interacts with them. And it's subtle and sometimes very overt. Think about the toys you were given as a little girl. Oftentimes, you may have been given a doll or a play cooking set. And the message, subtle or not, is to take care, to nurture. And that is incorporated into the linguistic style and the expectation that women have a tendency, again, speaking broadly, to use words and to form relationships to build rapport, emphasize similarities, and to balance needs. Where men have a tendency to resist, to challenge, and to emphasize their individuality. Now, what's really fascinating is depending on what industry that you're in, typically speaking, male linguistic styles rule the business world. So give that some thought. If in a non-COVID world and we were in a room together, I'd have you do an exercise where you could spend some time focusing on how do you express yourself. And on the next slide, I'll go into some of the more common differences that are associated with the way women speak and men speak. In terms of observations from the literature, women are coached or encouraged to stress the needs of others first, to emphasize community and relationships, and unfortunately, aggressive traits are less well liked by both men and women when they're displayed by women. So, do I have strategies? Do I have an opinion on these? I do, but for today, my point is these perceptions are out there, and you would be remiss without having that at least inform how you show up in an organization, being aware of what they are, how you choose. And one of the fascinating things about negotiations is my goal in any seminar, any class I teach is to provide a toolbox. And we have over 50 women on the call tonight. with 50 different personalities, moral compasses, and goals. I would like to give you strategies and approaches that fit for who you are. And what's really cool about negotiations is there may be a strategy and you're like, holy cow, I could never do that. You could tell Professor Lee was a lawyer. That's a real mean thing to do. That's fine. The value and the richness of this approach is, what do you do if those strategies and tactics are used against you? So whether you adopt everything you learn here tonight or not, the goal is to raise your level of awareness and to be mindful and to negotiate mindfully rather than reflexively. All right. In terms of some of the word choice that women use when compared to men, men have more of a tendency to use the I pronoun rather than the we pronoun. And to be fair, I think certain industries stress a we or a team vocabulary over others. Joining into the healthcare industry, there's much more of a sense of community and a more of the pronoun we. Coming from the law field, we're very much I folks. In terms of apologies, women have a tendency, the research suggests, to apologize more, to downplay their certainty, and to ask questions as a way to show engagement. Now, one of the things that I want to really focus on, especially, is the last one. Women, generally speaking, have a tendency, if they ask for something and someone says, sorry, that's against company policy, to back down. I want to encourage you to test that, to push a little. And as we get into some of the salary negotiation strategies and approaches, I'll give you some ways to do that. Okay. I've told you to be clear on what your interests are, to know that there are two components to negotiating your compensation, the money aspect, and then things that go to the role that you have within the organization, your voice, how you will show up, your title, because you will interview for your next title based on your current title, and your access in terms of your role or your voice at the organization. And we've briefly gone over how men and women, in general terms, communicate differently. All right, let's move on to how do you negotiate your career. Now, again, I started out with this and I'll come back to it because to me, it is critical. Your title and your salary set. And you may be able to change those in 6 months or 9 months after you begin at the organization. Your role is not set. How do you view yourself? And view yourself as a leader. I came in and my titles haven't caught up with it yet, thinking of myself as a full professor. What do I need to do to be a full professor? How does a full professor act? Where do I write? Who do I influence? So, what is the role that you want within an organization? Conduct a field analysis. Now, this is huge, and I have a slide on it on the next screen, so I will get to that in a second. Cultivate relationships. What do I mean by that? Who are the rock stars in your organization? What are they doing? What organizations do they belong to? Where do they socialize? If you're in academia, where are they publishing? Find that out. When I started at Cary, again, no other law professors. So yeah, I went to Wharton and said, hey, what's their law faculty doing? What organizations do they belong to? What journals are they writing in? Who are the rock stars both within your organization, but in your field? What are they doing? And begin to do what they do. And also, if you haven't already, I'm sure that you guys will be spending some time on mentors. I cannot overemphasize the importance of cultivating relationships by having good mentors. And for mentors, I like to have 3 tiers of mentors. It makes sense to have someone within the organization that knows the institutional history, that can guide you and navigate the roles and cultures and norms within your organization. It also makes sense to have someone outside the organization, because let's face it, we all like to complain about people we work with. Who is a trusted source outside of an organization that can help you navigate some of those relationships without having a direct tie to those individuals. And have an aspirational mentor. And that aspirational mentor, with them, you're playing the long game. I'm a very strategic oriented person. And again, my approach to negotiation is very much informed by having been a litigator and thinking about trial strategies. Who is someone outside of your organization that inspires you, that you would like to meet? For me, that was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And yeah, I started writing her like 8 years ago. No, she never wrote me back. However, if there had ever been the opportunity for our paths to cross, I'd shared with her, though a bit unrequited, my research interests. And I had wasn't hard to do, but for your aspirational mentor, have a Google search. Whenever they do a Google alert, whenever they do something noteworthy, and because you're playing the long game with them, hey, Jamie, you wrote an outstanding article on X that coincides with my research in this way. Your goal for your aspirational mentors, you don't ask for anything. You are laying the groundwork by showing connection, a similarity of interests that should you ever meet them, if they are ever at a conference, you have the opportunity to go up and share with them some of the information that you've been establishing over the years. Now, in navigating your career, one of my favorites, your 3 a.m. list. If your boss, and this would be kind of creepy, but work with me. If your boss were to go and show up in your bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, what are the things you need to reach the next stage of your career goals? Can you answer that question? Yet another example or story. At Cary, we have a laptop policy that faculty get new laptops every 3 years. About 10 years ago, when I first started at Cary, my kids were very young, and they took my laptop and they took my nail polish and they painted every row a different color. And they said, look, mommy, rainbow. I was horrified. Quick confession, and dating myself. Went to school in high school in the early 80s and did not feel that typing was a skill I needed. Now you have those cool skins you can lay over your keyboards. 10 years ago, they didn't have that. In taking the nail polish off my keys, yes, I also took off all the lettering. So I had a complete blank laptop. On my 3 a.m. list was, I need a new laptop. Shortly thereafter, yes, there's a happy ending to this story. The dean said, Stacey, I would like for you to develop our first online course, because I was really clear on what do I need if I ever hope to be successful at Cary, a new laptop. I was able to say, yes, I would love to. And I need a laptop with better processing speed and a high-def webcam. How can you take things that are important to you and link them to the needs of the organization? That's one of the easiest and fastest ways to get your needs met. So your 3 a.m. list, what do you need? And be mindful of, in those brief windows of time when you are highly relevant to your organization, is there a way to link a potential ask from them to something that you need that can help propel your career? All right. field analysis. Guys, oftentimes in negotiations, we get tunnel vision of focusing exclusively on who's the person sitting across from me at the table and how do I convince them to give me what I want. Here's the deal, guys. You may not always be the most effective person to ask for what you need. Do a field analysis. Who are folks in the sidelines? Mentors, supervisors, authorizing authorities, regulatory agencies that can help bolster your cause. Who are in the stands? Are there other managers from other departments who could put in a good word for you? What's the context? Yeah, at the end of the day, all roads go back to me. I'm a healthcare law attorney, and the Affordable Care Act is in front of the Supreme Court yet again. Whatever arguments were being prepared, say a year ago, the context of COVID has focused that in an entirely new direction. So when you're asking for things, when you're negotiating, how can you leverage the context of the situation, people from other departments, regulatory agencies to help bolster your cause? Oftentimes it's about so much more than the person sitting across from you at the table. And you do yourself a disservice by having a tunnel view of the negotiation. Expand it. Do a field analysis. Who's on your team? Who's on the other side of the team? And how can you leverage those sometimes underused resources to give you a bigger voice or more presence at the table? All right. So now let's just get into some nitty-gritty, tough interview things. Sometimes in negotiations, you're asked, so how much do you want to make in the negotiation? And there are several ways that you could answer that question. Some people feel uncomfortable saying, I want $82,000. And just a little tidbit here, the research says never give a round number, like I need $70,000. If you were to say I need $75,000 or $65,50, for some reason, a non-round number seems like it has more credibility and you put more thought into it. So don't say like 80 or 100 or 200. If you're asking for 200,000, call me after this. But anyway, have a number that reflects some credibility. However, if giving a direct number in response to that question doesn't fit with who you are, you can give a range, or you can flip the question back to them. Salary is one part of it. What range did you have in mind? Or the range for this position is between $80,000 and $110,000. Given the value that I believe I would bring to the organization, I expect to be at the high end of that range. Or salary is only one part of it. I would love to see your complete compensation package to get a better feel for what my needs might be. So practice these. And what I highly recommend, take your cell phones, put it on selfie mode, and practice saying these responses. As a litigator, I look for fear. I look for uncertainty. And if it's, I'd like $80,000 and they look uncertain, one of the things I love to do is just let it sit there in silence. And in silence, oftentimes, the person who gave the number, 80,000 is a lot. I could do with 75. Whatever you're asking for, you need to be as comfortable with that response as you are saying your name. And then you have that serene look on your face and you wait. So keep that in mind. All right. Let's talk about hardball tactics. That is, you've prepared, you know what your interests are, You've done an analysis, you know what the market generally bears, and you sit down with HR. Mistake number one. HR's interests in having you join the organization are not as strong as the person that you will be working for. Make sure throughout the compensation process or the hiring process that you are continually reaffirming your interest, your connection, the value that you will offer with the department or the person that you will be working with. And we'll get to it in a few minutes. That's also my little litmus test on as the salary progresses. Now, before I jump into the slide in front of us, how to negotiate. In COVID times, having in-person interviews, they're not super easy to come by. And I get that. And that makes sense. However, you want to have as close of a connection or visual on the person as possible. So negotiating over the phone, not a big fan. Negotiating through email, less of a fan. Think about it. When you dump someone, it is so easy to dump someone via email. Or, as my kids have taught me, just ghosting someone where you don't show up at all. It is more difficult to say no face to face or in person. So let's make it a little harder for them. You want to have conversations about your compensation in person or as close to visual physical distance as possible. Now, during that conversation, they may try a few things. My first is, let's take this one issue at a time. Never a fan of that approach. If we have the opportunity to hang out more together, you'll see that this is a distributive negotiation approach. Negotiating issue by issue makes it incredibly easy to say no to someone. When you negotiate, you want to find linkages in the things that you're asking for. So if I'm asking you, I'd like for you to work in our Philly office and start October 1st, and you're like, well, I don't really want to work in Philly. Can I work in Baltimore? Nope. I don't want to start in October. Can I start in November? No. However, I'm very interested in your position. I can work in Philly if I can start in October every time, or November. Every time they bring up Philly, you bring up November. You are linking issues so that the employer, or during the negotiation, there is a give and take and a connection between issues. Think about it. If I'm stuck on laptops, if you've ever bought a Dell laptop, can you build your own computer? No, they give you a package, and they give you a package because if you can select item by item, it would be a better deal for you, but it's harder to say no. So you want to negotiate by connecting issues. Next, I don't have the authority to do that. Be okay with asking questions. Then who does? And oftentimes, if you negotiate exclusively with HR, you may get these types of responses. Sorry, we don't do that. That's not negotiable. I don't have the authority to do that. It is okay. And I encourage you. Then who does? Who's the appropriate person that I should be talking to? Ask questions. The next, that's not negotiable. I try that with my kids and it doesn't work. Here's the thing. If you're told something isn't negotiable, can you trade it for another non-negotiable item? Here's what I mean by that. You guys are all pretty smart, so I can't imagine you're going to have a desire to get a ton more education. Let's say that the organization that you're joining has a tuition reimbursement policy, and you're like, you know what? I don't need another degree after my name. However, I'd like relo. And when you ask for a relocation expense, nope, sorry, we don't do relo. That's not negotiable. Can you trade? I see that you allot $5,000 for tuition reimbursement. I don't see myself using that benefit. I would like that line item transferred over and have that go towards relo. Here's the thing. People are not going to go out of their way to create a pathway for yes for you. However, in preparing for negotiations, if there are things that aren't negotiable, see about a creative solution of trading it for something else. In response to, I can't do that right now. With COVID, I'm sorry, hiring freeze. We can't do that right now. Great. I would like to revisit this conversation in 6 months. And then, and this could just be the lawyer in me, this should not be just an oral conversation. People's memories get foggy. You need to follow up in an email. And before you get to the 6-month mark, perhaps at 3 months, we discussed reviewing my salary in 6 months. To date, over the past 3 months, I've accomplished X, Y, and Z. And when you're talking about your X, Y, and Z accomplishments, how have they helped the organization? That's very much, and framing is incredibly important. Because at the end of the day, you want to rent space in someone else's brain. And you rent space in someone else's brain when they figure out that you're going to do something for them by talking about your accomplishments in terms of how this is benefited or how it will benefit the organization is incredibly important. So especially keep that in mind when you ask for a raise. People have a tendency to say, hey, I like a raise. Last year I did X, Y, and Z. The very cynical Stacey says, did you cash your paychecks? And if you did, you were paid for that. So that's nice, but that's in the past. You're asking for more money in the future. If you're going to ask for a raise, if you're going to ask for something, rent space in my brain by telling me how an additional $5,000 or $10,000 is going to further the interests of the organization. What am I getting on a go forward, not retrospective basis? This one is a tough one that would disrupt our internal wage structure. Again, you can bring up issues of parity, but if we're being entirely honest, this has been a stumbling block for me. So this is a tough one. Know that it is tough and that you may have to play a longer game and reiterate your request at some point in the future. I'm keeping an eye on the time. All right. So in negotiations, what are some big do's and don'ts? Highlight your skills. And for, again, every quality that you say you possess on your CV or your resume, have a story. If I had a dime for everyone who told me they're an out-of-the-box creative thinker, so is everyone. Give me a story that explains that or demonstrates that. Do not, again, the lawyer inside of me, do not dump your boyfriend, move across country, tell your old boss to hit the road until you have an offer in writing. And if you discussed things that are not in the offer letter, get a rewritten offer letter. All of the promises that are made need to be contained in that document. And depending on where you are in your career, there comes a point in time when anytime you get an employment agreement, you need to run it by an attorney. When you are middle to upper management, their legal department has looked at the employment contract. It is construed to their benefit to use the $300 or $400 to retain an attorney to take a look at it, looking at covenants not to compete, intellectual property, grounds for termination, severance agreements. Those are just buzzwords that if you're going down the road of an employment agreement, an attorney well-versed in employment law will know what to look for. And I really encourage you to do that. Don't get greedy. Do not go back 20 times over salary. It puts a bad taste in their mouth. And here's just some basic advice. If this is your MIC job, meaning it's a job, but you don't consider yourself that you'll be staying there for a long time, which is absolutely fine. Don't get really greedy and aggressive in negotiating the salary. And the best thing I can do about that is an analogy. If I buy a piece of equipment at IKEA, I know I'm not going to be handing it down to my kids. If I go down to High Point, North Carolina, and I get an antique and I paid a lot for it, my expectations are high. The higher your salary, the difference the expectations of your employer. So make sure that what you're paid, if a high end, aligns with the amount of effort that you're going to put in. And also give some thought about how your structuring of the compensation sends messages to your employer. If you ask for a high signing bonus, the message that you're sending is, I may not be here long, as opposed to long-term stock options that will vest over time. That says to me, you plan on sticking around for a while. If you're okay with a low base salary and high commission, that to me says that you as an individual plan on bringing it every day. So give thought, signing bonuses, stock options, commission. What subtle messages or not so subtle messages are you also sending your employer about your level of commitment to the organization? Also, I said I'd get back to the my thoughts on negotiating with HR versus the person that you're going to work with or for. By having the salary conversation with your boss as opposed to HR and asking them to intercede on your behalf to bring the salary in alignment with the value that you think that you'll bring to the organization. If your future or prospective boss says, HR really handles these things, or, I let HR handle that. To me, that's a huge red flag. If they're unwilling to go to bat for you over salary, how will they help navigate and nurture your career while you're at that organization? All right, guys. We have about 8 minutes longer, if you'd like, for questions on anything that I've shared with you.
Stacey, I have a confession. I lost my internet connection and had to log back in, so I have lost the entire Q&A. Can you see it?
Let's see. Oh, yes. All right.
Okay, so I unfortunately will have to leave it to you, which is probably more fortunate, to look at the questions and answer as many as you can. And I can share them with you after the webinar. I apologize.
Okay. Let's start with how do you deal with managers when they say it's company policy not to promote within 2 years? I'd be interested in knowing why that's the company policy. And again, when you ask these questions, you need to have your serene face, but it is okay to ask, why is that the policy? And I'd be interested in having a conversation, if we could look at my performance over the next year, see if I hit certain milestones, could we accelerate the promotion policy? So again, at a minimum, asking why that's the policy, but also telegraph to them that you are really looking to advance in the company and you'd love to see, is there a pathway in terms of what deliverables or accomplishments you're looking for to accelerate that 2-year timeline? And it could be a hard no. However, that's okay. Get that information. I've been recruited by another company via a past colleague. I wasn't actively looking for a different job. So your plan B is awesome. That is, hey, I'm happy where I am. And if this new prospect never came, I'm content where I am. but I'm open to learning about other opportunities. How should I navigate between learning about the new role, potentially getting an offer, and bringing that back to my current company in case I can leverage that offer for a salary increase? And the important part, without damaging existing relationships. All right, here's the deal on that one. Are you open to leaving? If you are open to leaving, then I think it's very okay to go on the interview and to find out new information. If you're using it because you want to leverage and get more money at your current employer, be aware of the messages that they send. First, it affirms that you're attractive to other employers. That's good. However, you've now let me know that you would leave, which is okay too. So I think of it like this. The colleague that gave you the job opportunity, are you worried about that relationship? And if so, I'd be honest with them. The company that you could be taking on a test ride, careful. And in that, how big is your industry? If you go for a job offer, get it, and then say no, could that have repercussions? Also, in terms of your current employer, you're asking for a salary increase. I hear you on that. But a salary increase just because someone will pay you more isn't super attractive to me as your current employer. Are you looking for more responsibility? Are you looking for a bigger voice? Other than just wanting more money, what do you want within that organization? And if you can couple that with I want more responsibility, I want a new title, I want to take on new challenges, that to me is the proper partner to ask for a salary increase. It may be a bit tougher with, hey, someone else likes me and they're willing to pay me $10,000 more. Will you? Because from what I'm getting from your post is you didn't necessarily feel underpaid and you're happy where you are. So those are things to keep in mind. I'm about to enter into a negotiation to join a very small business as an equity partner. Good for you. Currently, there is one other owner and I will be the second. Are there any key items to consider for this negotiation? Absolutely. And this is a good question. So, equity partner, you need to, because in addition to salary and it being a small business, I don't know how much movement there is with that. For me, when I joined Hopkins, my voice was very important. For you, you want to look into what does ownership mean in terms of profit distributions, in terms of things like that. So, if you have like an email or something and you could hit Jamie up with that, there's some information I could share with you because it's way too much to get into in the time we have allotted. How do you go about asking if there is an annual bonus? I'd like to fully understand your compensation package or structure, including the promotion schedule, bonuses, profit distributions, retirement, that you can just sandwich that in with a bunch of other things. I think that's absolutely fair to ask. And sometimes people get nervous about asking questions like this. First, don't ask until they made the offer. Once they've made the offer, they like you. They like you a lot. Then it's okay to ask. Promotion schedules. I'm incredibly excited about being here and moving up within the organization. I'd be interested in knowing what is the trajectory for career advancements in terms of promotion schedules. At what point within the process do you ask about compensation? Oh, I'm a big fan on wait until you get the job offer. Do you find that a majority of people are motivated by one column versus another? I don't know if it's gender so much as where you are in your career, and how excited you are by the job. how do I put this? I came from the law background. Sometimes lawyers are a little shallow. In law, people are primarily motivated by the first column. How much am I going to get paid? I know that this is going to take a huge chunk of time out of my life, and I want to make sure I'm compensated for it. If I were to talk to doctors and healthcare providers, there I think it's trickier. I think that you have a different type of person that gravitates toward the healthcare industry. And I've seen more of a balance, a more balanced, healthier approach, having a voice. If you're going for an NGO or other things, I don't think that it's necessarily on gender lines. I think it's the industry and what passion you are bringing to the job. If you've gotten to a good place on compensation, and they will be in writing, yep, and the non-compensatory things are not in writing and are verbal, yes, get them in writing. People get amnesia. Again, however, and I can't see your faces, so here's the deal. I don't have a very kind face. There are some people that just have kind faces, and as much as gender influences what comes out of your mouth, I think the kindness and the sereneness of your appearance very much influence. I think it's critical to ask, and it should be done in a way that you don't look particularly rude about it. So for me, much in part reinforced by my kids, where I had to look at their like kindergarten artwork and think and slap on a face that said, oh, this is really good. I'm really excited about the voice that we're talking about me having within your organization and the role that I would take on. I very much like to include all of that in the offer letter, just so nothing's missed, and that you can accurately assess me come evaluation on these things that very much go into the role and impact I will have within this organization. How do you negotiate internally if you're working on a team for a year or so and like to negotiate a raise for the coming year? The team is not willing to pay you as much as no, they are not willing to pay you as much as a new hire. However, again, to the extent that you want a raise, how is that going to benefit the organization? So very much using that as the framework will get you some latitude or some increase. But again, yes, you will never be paid the same as someone that they are getting off the street. Related to gender differences, any tips about how to battle imposter syndrome throughout a negotiation process? Wow, Jenny, awesome question. Again, one that I will link to in an article, just because, and I appreciate, if you guys have to jump off, that is absolutely fine. I have the questions because they keep growing. But if you want to hang out for a while, I will endeavor to plow through some more. How do you have strategies to combat the impression that women who are direct are, That is a loaded question. And here's the thing. If we are being incredibly honest, being female versus male, your words take on a certain perspective or can engender a certain reaction. And there's also the added complexity of race, adding additional nuances. I have a very direct personality, and there are tons of strategies out there that encourage women to pick from a variety of tools, many of which are aimed at taking my personality and making it more palatable to the people that I negotiate with. I have difficulty negotiating in those roles. For me to be able to assert what I want, I deal very much in facts. And I do try and watch my tone, but in terms of the substance of what I say, I don't change it. And what I found is facts are easier and quantifiable facts. So if I were to come in and say, yeah, I'm really good at my job, coming from a man, that might be perceived one way, from a woman might be perceived another way. Rather than saying I'm really good at my job, I increased student retention on blah, 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 20%. So I find, what is the currency within the organization or the industry? How do they like results described or quantified? And that is the language that I will use to get my point across. What do you think about sharing a number first? It depends on how much homework you've done. If you're asked, what would you like? I would answer the question. If they come with the number first, that's okay too. And generally speaking, in the employment situation, the employer does share the first number. However, in our high-tech world, there are often times where you're required to put your salary in the online application. Excuse me. And I get questions about that. Should I put a number too low, too high, leave it blank? Not a fan of leaving it blank. Given our economy, there are lots of people applying for jobs. You do not need your application kicked out because it is deemed incomplete. Put in a number that's fair. However, to me, that's always subject to revision. Now that I've learned more about the role and how I could benefit the organization, I think an accurate reflection of the value I can bring to this organization would be a salary of blah. And again, practice this, folks. I've been in the same manager role for the past 5 years. I've asked about a promotion but every 6 months. I'm just given more work, yet continue to successfully deliver on those tasks. Okay, so if I'm getting your question correctly, you've been stuck in the same role for 5 years, busting your butt. Every time you ask for a promotion, you're like, yeah, you're doing such a great job. And your reward is more work. I do wonder, and first, how are you holding them accountable? Are these conversations you have in your annual review and they're not written down? Another might be put it in writing. And C, go back to the field analysis. Are there other people that can make your case more effectively than you can? Are there people that have leverage over whoever your boss is that could help champion your cause, who are allies within the organization that you could rely on? Also, in all honesty, guys, I'm a lawyer, which means, well, I think negotiation, and if we had time, in terms of dispute resolution or tough conversation resolution, negotiation is hands down the best approach in terms of personal satisfaction, feeling of autonomy, and increasing your confidence. However, if you've asked repeatedly, if you've brought it and delivered repeatedly, that may not be the organization for you to advance your career as you would like. I might consider being open to that as well. The last time you mentioned about sharing salary. Yeah. Oh my good. Okay, guys. I'll do as best as I'm not doing too bad.
No, let's take one more, and
okay, we'll take
and I
one
will
more.
share all the questions with you after the program, if you don't mind.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Sharing salary. Whew. Share salary information. One of the things that employers love is that people don't share their salaries. If you don't know what your colleagues are making, that as an employer gives me free range, because typically speaking, there's a range for all jobs. Some people will negotiate that initial offer, and negotiating that initial offer, it's the easiest way to get a $5,000 to $10,000 raise with having done nothing. Some people will do that, others won't. And that gap will persist for as long as you are at the organization. You need to know what your colleagues are making. Now, I feel like asking about your salaries, like asking about my weight. We've got to be really good friends for me to share that. So establish an element of trust and be okay with the idea that you may have to go first. Hey, I make X. I'm just trying to get the pulse. What are you making? Build a level of trust, which is a critical component in all relationships. And from there, work hard to find out what other folks are making. If nothing else, it gives you the confidence that when you're asking for something, that you're not clearly out of line with what the organization is willing to pay. Thanks, guys. There is so much to talk about in terms of negotiation, compensation, and the role that gender and other characteristics play in influencing how those conversations go. Jamie will share the questions that you have, and to the extent possible, I've already shared with her a reading list that I really recommend. I may be able to share a couple of additional articles to address some of the issues that you guys have raised. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you guys tonight, and happy negotiating.
Thank you so much. I've actually put the survey in the chat. I did it earlier, so hopefully y'all have had a chance to fill it out. We really want to hear from you and how you feel about everything. I will send a follow-up email that will include a recording of the program along with the resources that Professor Lee described. So we'd like to thank you, Professor Lee, for your time and your talent, and we'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the Cary Business School Women's Alumni Network, and the Penn Club Women in Business. And last but not least, definitely not least, we'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. So we wish you a happy, healthy Thanksgiving. Stay safe. Please, everyone, stay safe. I'm going to be thinking about all of you as these months go by, and we hope you have an absolutely amazing holiday season. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.